Hello, welcome to my literary moment. Yes, Shelby, I'm going to now talk about a book.
Oh no, she's doing it again.
Yes, it's this time it's Carson McCullers. Don't know how it's pronounced. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. It's a beautiful title, and the reason I'm attracted to this book is because I like Southerner American uh, American Southerner writers, which is not the same as South American writers, of course. American writers that come from the South. So another one, I can name a few, but I have to remember and I didn't prepare. So please forgive me. But there are quite a few, and they're very good storytellers. So Carson McCullers she was very young when she published this book, and it's still like, you're like, wow, how could somebody so young have such insight into the human heart? She was actually, wow, how old was she? She was 23 in 1940. And when you read this book, you're like, how can it be 1940? It was like the same issues that we have in America today, whether it's racism and loneliness or it's classical issues. It's the way that Greek tales have the same issues. She was amazing, and it's just a very lovely, really good writer. So I'm going to skip all the introductions and I'm going to read because that's what we should do with books. Sometimes by the time you get to the introduction, it's exhausting. So this is part one. I'm going to read it out loud. Carson McCullers, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. In the town, there were two mutes, and they were always together. Early every morning, they would come out from the house where they lived and walk arm in arm down the street to work. The two friends were very different. The one who always steered the way was an obese and dreamy Greek. In the summer, he would come out wearing a yellow or green polo shirt, stuffed sloppily into his trousers in front and hanging loose behind. When it was colder, he wore over this a shapeless gray sweater. His face was round and oily, with half-closed eyelids and lips that curved in a gentle, stupid smile. The other mute was tall. His eyes had a quick, intelligent expression. He was always immaculate and very soberly dressed. Every morning, the two friends walked silently together until they reached the main street of the town. Then, when they came to a certain fruit and candy store, they paused for a moment on the sidewalk outside. The Greek, Spyros Antonopoulos, worked for his cousin who owned this fruit store. His job was to make candies and sweets, uncrate the fruits, and to keep the place clean. The thin mute, John Singer, nearly always put his hand on his friend's arm and looked for a second into his face before leaving him. Then after this goodbye, Singer crossed the street and walked on alone to the jewelry store where he worked as a silverware engraver. In the late afternoon, the friends would meet again. Singer came back to the fruit store and waited until Antonopoulos was ready to go home. The Greek would be lazily unpacking a case of peaches or melons, or perhaps looking at the funny paper in the kitchen behind the store where he cooked. Before their departure, Antonopoulos always opened a paper sack kept hidden during the day on one of the kitchen shelves. Inside was stored various bits of food he had collected, a piece of fruit, samples of candy, or the butt end of a liverwurst. Usually before leaving, Antonopoulos waddled gently to the glass case in the front of the store where some meats and cheeses were kept. He glided open the back of this case, and his fat hand groped lovingly for some particular dainty inside which he had wanted. Sometimes his cousin who owned the place did not see him, but if he noticed, he stared at his cousin with a warning in his tight, pale face. Sadly, Antonopoulos would shuffle the morsel from one corner of the case to the other. During these times, Singer stood very straight with his hands in his pockets and looked in another direction. They did not like to watch this little scene between the two Greeks, for excepting drinking and a certain solitary secret pleasure, Antonopoulos loved to eat more than anything else in the world. In the dusk, the two mutes walked slowly home together. At home, Singer was always talking to Antonopoulos. His hands shaped the words in a swift series of designs. His face was eager, and his gray-green eyes sparkled brightly. With his thin, strong hands, he told Antonopoulos all that had happened during that day. Antonopoulos sat back lazily and looked at Singer. It was seldom that he had ever moved his hands to speak at all, and then it was to say that he wanted to eat, or to sleep, or to drink. These three things he always said with the same vague, fumbling sighs. At night, if he were not too drunk, he would kneel down before his bed and pray a while. Then his plump hands shaped the words, Holy Jesus, O God, O darling Mary. These were the only words Antonopoulos ever said. Singer never knew just how much his friend understood of all the things he told him, but it did not matter. They shared the upstairs of a small house near the business section of the town. There were 2 rooms. On the oil stove of the kitchen, Antonopoulos cooked all of their meals. There were straight, plain kitchen chairs for Singer and an overstuffed sofa for Antonopoulos. The bedroom was furnished mainly with a large double bed, covered with an eiderdown comfort for the big Greek and a narrow iron cot for Singer. Dinner always took a long time because Antonopoulos loved food and he was very slow. After they had eaten, the big Greek would lie back on his sofa and slowly lick over each one of his teeth with his tongue, either from a certain delicacy or because he did not wish to lose the savor of the meal, while Singer washed the dishes. Sometimes in the evening the mutes would play chess. Singer had always greatly enjoyed this game, and years before he had tried to teach it to Antonopoulos. At first his friend could not be interested in the reasons for moving the various pieces about on the board. Then Singer began to keep a bottle of something good under the table to be taken out after each lesson. The Greek never got on to the erratic movements of the knights and the sweeping mobility of the queens, but he learned to make a few set opening moves. He preferred the white pieces and would not play if the black men were given him. After the first moves, Singer worked out the game by himself while his friend looked on drowsily. If Singer made brilliant attacks on his own man, so that in the end the Black King was killed, Antonopoulos was always very proud and pleased. The 2 mutes had no other friends, and except when they worked, they were alone together. Each day was very much like any other day, because they were alone so much that nothing ever disturbed them. Once a week they would go to the library for Singer to withdraw a mystery book, and on Friday night they attended a movie. Then on payday, they always went to the 10-cent photograph shop above the Army and Navy store so that Antonopoulos could have his picture taken. These were the only places where they made customary visits. There were many parts in the town that they had never even seen. The town was in the middle of the deep south. The summers were long and the months of winter cold were very few. Nearly always the sky was a glassy, brilliant azure, and the sun burned down riotously bright. Then the light, chill rains of November would come, and perhaps later there would be frost and some short months of cold. The winters were changeable, but the summers always were burning hot. The town was a fairly large one. On the main street there were several blocks of 2- and 3-story shops and business offices, but the largest buildings in the town were the factories, which employed a large percentage of the population. These cotton mills were big and flourishing, and most of the workers in the town were very poor. Often in the faces along the streets there was the desperate look of hunger and of loneliness. But the two mutes were not lonely at all. At home, they were content to eat and drink, and Singer would talk with his hands eagerly to his friend about all there was in his mind. So the years passed in this quiet way until Singer reached the age of 32 and had been in town with Antonopoulos for 10 years. Then, one day, the Greek became ill. He sat up in bed with his hands on his fat stomach, and big, oily tears rolled down his cheeks. Singer went to see his friend's cousin, who owned the fruit store, and also he arranged for leave from his own work. The doctor made out a diet for Antonopoulos and said that he could drink no more wine. Singer rigidly enforced the doctor's orders. All day he sat by his friend's bed and did what he could to make the time pass quickly. But Antonopoulos only looked at him angrily from the corners of his eyes and would not be amused. The Greek was very fretful and kept finding fault with the fruit drinks and food that Singer prepared for him. Constantly he made his friend help him out of bed so that he could pray. His huge buttocks would sag down over his plump little feet when he kneeled. He fumbled with his hands to say "Darling Mary," and then he held to the small brass cross tied to his neck with a dirty string. His big eyes would wall up to the ceiling with a look of fear in them. And afterwards he was very sulky and would not let his friend speak to him. Singer was patient and did all that he could. He drew little pictures, and once he made a sketch of his friend to amuse him. This picture hurt the big Greek's feelings, and he refused to be reconciled until Singer had made his face very young and handsome, and colored his hair bright yellow and his eyes china blue. And then he tried not to show his pleasure. Singer nursed his friend so carefully that after a week Antonopoulos was able to return to his work, but from that time on there was a difference in their way of life. Trouble came to the two friends. Antonopoulos was not ill anymore, but a change had come in him. He was irritable and no longer content to spend the evenings quietly in their home. When he would wish to go out, Singer followed him along close behind him. Antonopoulos would go into a restaurant, and while they set up the table, he slyly put lumps of sugar or a pepper shaker or pieces of silverware in his pocket. Singer always paid for what he took, and there was no disturbance. At home he scolded Antonopoulos, but the big Greek only looked at him with a bland smile. The months went on, and these habits of Antonopoulos grew worse. One day at noon he walked calmly out of the fruit store of his cousin and urinated in public against the wall of the First National Bank building across the street. At times he would meet people on the sidewalk whose faces did not please him, and he would bump into these persons, and push at them with his elbows and stomach. He walked into a store one day and hauled out a floor lamp without paying for it. Another time he tried to take an electrical train he had seen in a showcase. For Singer, this was a time of great distress. He was continually marching Antonopoulos down to the courthouse during lunch hour to settle these infringements of the law. Singer became very familiar with the procedure of the courts, and he was in a constant state of agitation. The money he had saved in the bank was spent for bail and fines. All of his efforts and money were used to keep his friend out of jail because of such charges as theft, committing public indecencies, and assault and battery. The Greek cousin from whom Antonopoulos worked did not enter into these troubles at all. Charles Parker, for that was the name his cousin had taken, let Antonopoulos stay on at the store, but he watched him always with his pale, tight face, and he made no effort to help him. Singer had a strange feeling about Charles Parker. He began to dislike him. Singer lived in a continual turmoil and worry. But Antonopoulos was always bland, and no matter what happened, the gentle, flaccid smile was still on his face. In all the years before, it had seemed to Singer that there was something very subtle and wise in the smile of his friend. He had never known just how much Antonopoulos understood what he was thinking. Now, in the big Greek's expression, Singer thought that he could detect something sly and joking. He would shake his friend by the shoulders until he was very tired and explain things over and over with his hands, but nothing did any good. All of Singer's money was gone, and he had to borrow from the jeweler for whom he worked. On one occasion, he was unable to pay bail for his friend, and Antonopoulos spent the night in jail. When Singer came to get him out the next day, he was very sulky. He did not want to leave. He had enjoyed his dinner of saw belly and cornbread and syrup poured over it, and the new sleeping arrangements and his cellmates pleased him. They had lived so much alone that Singer had no one to help him in his distress. Antonopoulos let nothing disturb him or cure him of his habits. At home he sometimes cooked the new dish he had eaten in the jail, and on the streets there was never any knowing just what he would do. And then the final trouble came to Singer. One afternoon he had come to meet Antonopoulos at the fruit store when Charles Parker handed him a letter. The letter explained that Charles Parker had made arrangements for his cousin to be taken to the state insane asylum, 200 miles away. Charles Parker had used his influence in town, and the details were already settled. Antonopoulos was to leave and to be admitted into the asylum the next week. Singer read the letter several times, and for a while he could not think. Charles Parker was talking to him across the counter, but he did not even try to read his lips and understand. At last Singer wrote on the little pad he always carried in his pocket, "You cannot do this. Antonopoulos must stay with me." Charles Parker shook his head excitedly. He did not know much American. "None of your business," he kept saying over and over. Singer knew that everything was finished. The Greek was afraid that some day he might be responsible for his cousin. Charles Parker did not know much about the American language, but he understood the American dollar very well, and he had used his money and influence to admit his cousin to the asylum without delay. There was nothing Singer could do. The next week was full of feverish activity. He talked, and although his hands never paused to rest, he could not tell all that he had to say. He wanted to talk to Antonopoulos of all the thoughts that he had ever been in his mind and his heart, but there was no time. There was not time. His gray eyes glittered, and his quick, intelligent face expressed great strain. Antonopoulos watched him drowsily, and his friend did not know just what he really understood. Then came the day when Antonopoulos must leave. Singer brought out his own suitcase and very carefully packed the best of their joint possessions